But today for our lecture, what we're going to focus on is we're going to focus on the 3 different types of discipline. And this can be something that we can think about throughout our whole course. And so when we think about discipline, we can think about preventative discipline. And so what are some actions that we can take that would prevent the misbehavior from occurring at all? And so this is a really important part of discipline, is thinking ahead and thinking about what potential problems there might be and how can we work to even prevent those. And then there's also things that we can think about with supportive discipline. So things are going pretty well, but how can we keep them going well? And then we want to also think about corrective discipline, which is how can we help the student return to proper behavior? Sometimes that's an immediate intervention. Sometimes it's long-term, and it takes a while for a child to learn that proper behavior. So let me share with you an example from a local child care center that I was working with here in town. So see, what oftentimes happens is when I'm working with people, working with either parents or people who are currently working with children, oftentimes the questions that they'll have for me will be very corrective discipline in nature. So for example, when I was working with these child care providers, I said, so what are some questions that you have for me? And one of them said, well, sometimes we take the kids for a little walk down the street about 2 blocks away to a city park. And when we take them there, we ask them to stay within a certain boundary. And sometimes they just run out onto the field. And it seems like it's really been a big problem lately. And we don't want them running out onto that grassy field because there's no fence between that field and the parking lot. And we worry about them out there on that field. And so the question was, the person said, so what do we do when they run out on the field? And I thought that was such an interesting question, because she didn't ask, what can we do to prevent them from running out on the field? Or what can we do to keep them in that area that we want them to play in? Her question was, what do we do when they do it? And I think that that's a really easy mindset to get when you work with kids, is that you start to think, well, what can I do when they do something wrong? And I think that it's good to kind of rethink that mindset. So, for example, going back to that grass example with going to the park. So the first thing that I wanted to think about with preventative discipline was I wanted to try to see that from the child's point of view. And I always think that's a good idea as either a child care provider or an educator, is to think about the situation from that child's point of view. And so I'm thinking, do you think that's a pretty normal thing to want to run on grass? And in fact, I opened up the shades of the room that we were in at this child care center, and we looked out the window, and I said, take a look out at your playground. Now, their playground, it had grass, but it was kind of scant grass. It was grass that had been ran on a lot by kids, and there were little patches of grass here and there. It wasn't really lush green grass, and it definitely didn't have the look of like soft, beautiful grass. And I pictured in my head, because they said this was a city park, that probably the grass field that they were talking about was probably a pretty wide open field and had beautiful, lush green grass on it. And do you think that's a normal thing for a child when they see that beautiful grass to want to run on it, to want to roll on it, to want to be on it? I think it is. I think it's a pretty normal thing for a human to want. In fact, that's why they take the time to manicure that grass, is because it's an attractive thing to humans. And so I wasn't really sure if that was really a normal request to have of children, if it was a reasonable request, I guess I should say. And so we talked about what are some ways that we can honor that interest in the grass, but still keep kids safe. And they talked about how maybe they could bring the parachute down there and they could do some parachute games on the grass. Or that maybe they could start at the top of the field and roll down on the grass and have some fun, maybe even play like a quick little relay game or something, to where it has some structure to where kids aren't running crazy and running into the parking lot, but to where they're getting some experience on grass. And then for their free play, then it could be, okay, now we're going to go onto the playground and we're going to stay within these boundaries. But instead of just saying, stay off the grass, they could be doing something to kind of acknowledge that, yeah, it's a normal thing to want to play on the grass. The other thing that we talked about with preventative discipline is that, are those boundaries really clear to the children? So we talked about how maybe bringing some small cones down and placing those around the edge of the playground might be kind of a visual reminder for students of what their boundaries are. Another thing we could do is we could really play up on the imagination of the children that they're working with. And we could say things like, today we're going to pretend that we're on a ship out in the ocean. And if you if you go outside of these boundaries, then you're going into the ocean, and you could kind of make that fun. Or maybe you pretend that you're building a fence all the way around the playground. And then you talk about how the fence is there to remind us to stay safe in the playground. And then you could even joke around and say, uh-oh, we forgot to put a gate in the fence. Don't worry, I brought my saw. We'll cut a gate right when it's time and ready to go. So we talked about some of those different strategies for preventative discipline, but do you see how that really changes the mindset? So we kind of tried to stop going, well, what do we do when they run out, to, well, what could we do to prevent that from happening to begin with? And it becomes a whole different mindset for people that are working with children. So then we moved on to supportive discipline. And I said, okay, so let's say that they're staying in the playground, everything is going great. How do we keep that going well? And one of the things that a really brave employee there answered was, she said, well, there's a rule when we have kids outside, is that we're not supposed to stand together as the teachers, that we're supposed to be at different places around the playground, and we're not supposed to be standing next to each other and talking. And she said, we do a really good job of following that rule in our own playground because our supervisor can just look out her office window and see us. But when we're down at the park, no one's really there watching us. And so we probably do tend to just stand together and we're talking and watching the kids. And she said, it's not like we're talking about bad things. I mean, a lot of times we're talking about what are some things that we could do with the kids when we get back, and we're doing job-related discussions. She said, don't get me wrong. She said, but we do stand there and we do talk, and we kind of take advantage of that time because we don't get that time to do that back at the center very often. And I thought that was really brave of her to admit, and also very reflective, because although I can see that need to communicate with your colleagues, and but also it does make one wonder, doesn't it, that when the adults are so involved in their conversation to where maybe the kids are feeling a little bit ignored, and maybe that running out onto the field is even a way of even getting their attention possibly. And so we talked about also about how when they are out there talking with the kids, they can also be kind of redirecting when they notice that maybe a child's getting bored. They can say things like, what's another way that you could keep the swing going? Or they might notice that a child's getting bored and they might pull out some little cars that they could play with in the gravel. Or they might sing a little sing-song song that goes along with them going up and down the slide, and something that would kind of engage them and where they would have fun. Or maybe they notice two children having a problem with sharing a piece of equipment, and they're able to resolve that rather than one of the students getting frustrated and running off. So when they separate out and they become more engaged with the children, that probably is going to help support that behavior of the children staying in their place where they're supposed to stay in the playground. And so if we work on those preventative measures and those supportive measures, then we're not going to have to spend as much time really even thinking about the corrective discipline. Now, of course, it is still great to have a plan for the corrective discipline. And the corrective discipline might be where the next time that they go to the park, that, the child who ran out of the boundaries maybe doesn't get to go. And that the teacher says with great sadness, oh, so sorry. Last time we had some problems with you running out of the playground, and it just makes us worry so much for your safety. This time you're going to stay back at the center, but I bet next time you'll be ready to go. And so it may be something like that, where there's kind of a delayed consequence with that. So, but the point is that we don't want to think just about the corrective discipline. Another example of that is a relative of mine who was divorced and had a 3-year-old daughter, and the 3-year-old daughter was transferred to between mom and dad every other weekend, and so she had primary custody with mom, and every other weekend mom would drive the little girl 1 hour, and the dad would drive 1 hour from the other direction, and they would meet up, and she would transfer her daughter over. Now, transferring her daughter to him worked out fine, but it was the picking her up at the end of the weekend that she said that there were some major behavior problems with her daughter, throwing tantrums and things in the back seat. And so when she called me, and she gave me permission to share this, but when she called me, she said, "What do I do when she throws a tantrum?" Now again, notice how her question is very much geared towards trying to be corrective, whereas it becomes a much different decision when we think preventatively. So again, the first thing that I like to think about when I'm thinking about preventative discipline is I like to think about things from the child's point of view. So let's think about what that feels like for that child. Number one, that child's already been in the car for 1 hour. And now that child's coming into a new car for an hour. And that's a really long car ride for a young child. And so she may be throwing a tantrum just because she needs to get some movement out, and she needs to kind of have that acknowledged. Let's also think about her emotionally. She's saying goodbye to her dad that she knows that she's not going to see again for another 2 weeks. Now, as a 3-year-old, she can't really fathom what 2 weeks is, but she knows that she doesn't get to see her dad very much. And when she says goodbye to her dad, she doesn't get to see her dad for a long, long, long time. And so that can feel pretty frustrating for a young child, and maybe her not really knowing how to manage those emotions. So really just first of all, trying to think about that and trying to have some empathy and compassion from that child's point of view. So one of the things that I recommended to her mom was, I said, find a little backpack around your house that you're not using and call that your pickup backpack. And before your daughter leaves this next time, say to your daughter, we're going to get some things ready in the pickup backpack. And this is when I pick you up from your dad, then this is a backpack that you'll get to open, and you'll get to play with the things that are in the backpack on the way home. And so her daughter picked out a few toys and a few books around the house. She also found a CD that they could play in the car stereo that she thought that would be kind of fun. And a special little blanket, a special little stuffed animal. And so those things were put into the pickup backpack, and that was put into the car. And the mom kept saying, oh, won't this be so much fun when I pick you up? We'll get to take out the pickup backpack. That'll be so much fun. And they also put in some special snacks and things like that into the pickup backpack as well. So the next time that she picked up her daughter, she immediately had the pickup backpack. They got it out of the trunk together and they put it in the back seat. And her daughter was just so excited. And she said that just right there just helped put a whole new spin on things. The other thing that she did was she found a little playland at a fast food restaurant that wasn't too far from the pickup place, to where they started making that a tradition, that they stopped there for a quick little snack and a little bit of playtime before they got back into the car. So it was really a way of acknowledging that her daughter needed to get some movement out. When it was better weather, then she was able to maybe even do some outdoor kinds of things. She would look for a place where maybe they could stop and get some fresh air outdoors. So really some things there to where she really thought about that preventatively. And then for supportive, We talked about how, okay, so let's say things are going good. How can you keep things going good? And we talked about how it's really important for young children to have little songs and little sayings and little poems and things that they can do, little card games that they can play. And so, with my son, when he was little, about that age, we would sing a little song to this tune of Bingo. And so it would say, there was a boy who was really smart, and Tyrell was his name. Tyrell, Tyrell, and Tyrell was his name. Now, the next verse would be not a boy who was smart, but it might be a boy who was strong. There was a boy who was really strong. And another time it might be kind. There was a boy who was really kind. And so, and then he would maybe even sometimes want to do some silly things like, there was a boy who loved crocodiles. Oh yes, let's do that. There was a boy who loved crocodiles. Okay, and so we would just sing that song over and over, and we would put in different kinds of sayings that would go with descriptors for him. And that's a totally age-appropriate thing to do for a 3-year-old that would kind of keep that car time that really supportive in keeping the behaviors positive. And she never even had to even go to the corrective. And a lot of times when you spend time really focusing on the preventative and the supportive, the corrective isn't even needed. And so it just becomes a whole different mindset. Let me share with you another example. So this is an example of a beautiful bulletin board that we had at our school. And the kids all created different ocean animals, and then they placed the ocean animals at where they are at in the ocean. So we went from tide pools out into the very deep end of the ocean. We looked at the 5 different layers of the ocean. And now, I don't know if you can tell, but that light blue water, that is corrugated paper. It has like a texture to it. I think you'll be able to see it in another photo, but it just screams at young children, touch me, because it's not just a smooth area. Can you see here on this picture? Can you see the corrugated texture it has? So rather than saying to kids, don't touch this bulletin board, and maybe having consequences for children who do, instead, if you notice that area there that's all brown, well, that is an area that had the blue corrugated paper had to get cut off. And so what I ended up doing with that was I put that on the other side of the wall. So you can see that top left-hand picture up there is the part of the water that we didn't need. And so I put that on the other side of the wall, and I talked with the kids, and I talked with them about how cool this feels, and that you should touch this. And isn't it cool? Now you can see, if you look at it, and also the close-up view down on the right, that when they touch it, it leaves marks, and it leaves sometimes even little holes and things like that. It does kind of get ruined as they touch it. But that was okay, because that was extra. And so we talked about how that's the side that we can touch, and the other side we're going to look at. But because it really acknowledged that they would want to touch that that's a natural thing to be curious about, a natural thing to want to explore, that we didn't have problems with them touching the bulletin board, because we acknowledged that and we gave them a place where they could touch it. In fact, where they were encouraged to touch it. I think what could have made that even stronger was, you see how I have that out there, but there's nothing that labels it. It would have been really awesome to maybe put some cutout hands on it, and maybe the words touch this, or maybe what does this feel like, or something like that. It might have been neat to even add some visuals there. But it was a way of thinking through and saying, okay, I know this could potentially be a problem. What's a way to where we can be preventative with this and still be age appropriate? Here's an example of when a primary class has their class meeting, that when they're trying to solve problems, they do something to where they talk about bug wish. And so they say, it bugs me when you do this. I wish you would do that. And then they added some different phrases and things like, I don't like it when you, that makes me feel angry. I'm upset because, and then they talked about different ways that you could deal with those things, that you can walk away, that you can talk about it when you feel calm, that you can talk to someone else, etc. So this is really kind of gosh, it kind of depends on like when you start to use this. In a way, it can be preventative because you're trying to prevent kids from just having arguments and trying to encourage actual problem solving. It could also even be corrective if it's more in response to, oh, wow, I've noticed a lot of kids have been arguing. What's a way to where we can help them deal with these problems in a more positive way? So then maybe it's more of a corrective kind of a thing to where you could point out to the class, well, let me share with you what to do when someone is bugging you. In your book, you'll see this example here, though in your book it's black and white. But these are some posters that were at a child care center here in town. And you'll notice that the left one is about how to wash your hands, and it has actual pictures of a very young child going through all the different steps of washing his hands. And so again, this could be preventative to where the teacher says, I want to make sure that kids really know how to wash their hands. Maybe it was corrective. Maybe there'd been a real big problem with kids making a big mess around the sink. And so maybe the teacher chose this young boy, maybe even to say, who's the best person to choose to be our model? Oh, maybe it's the one who makes the biggest mess around the sink. Maybe he gets to be the model, and that actually encourages him to want to wash his hands properly, even more so. Or maybe we use different pictures of different kids throughout. It would be up to you. But when we look at something, we can't always tell if it's preventative, supportive, or corrective. It kind of depends on how it came about. But in any case, it still is a nice reaction. You can also see that the different centers that they have, this is what it looks like when we play with it, and this is what it looks like when we clean it up. This is being, in my mind, being very preventative, because oftentimes we'll say to kids like, well, that's not clean, or you need to clean up. But if they can actually see what it looks like when it's cleaned up, that becomes pretty powerful. And then as far as the supportive, is that it's really important that adults get involved with children as they clean up so that we're modeling for them. But this poster certainly could have been made as a response to children not knowing how to clean up, and the adults there saying, what can we do to help children know how to? So it could have been really kind of a corrective kind of a thing to where they were working to help correct behavior and help children learn proper behavior in this way. Having a morning routine with visuals to where as children walk in and it says, here's the steps, here's what we do every morning. Very preventative. Having a place where it's really clear where materials get put away. This is a middle school teacher that I worked with. And, having a place where her stapler, her tape, her scissors, pencil sharpener, the whiteout, those kinds of things, having a place where they always get returned to, she said, made a really big difference in her classroom organization. And even something as simple as this is an igloo built of milk jugs, that this could become even a preventative or a supportive kind of discipline to where it's a special place to read. And maybe there's a different special place to read in the room throughout different times of the year. Maybe a part of the year, maybe it's an igloo, maybe part of the year it's a tent, maybe part of the year it's a big sun umbrella. There could be all different kinds of things, but then it could make that place a very special place to read, and where kids aren't getting bored, and in a sense that becomes preventative. So I hope that this is giving you something to think about, and as you are reading about the different pioneers of behavior management and reading about and watching some of the videos about some different ideas and such, I hope that you'll be thinking about preventative discipline, supportive discipline, and corrective discipline. And to remember that so much of guiding behavior really needs to be focused more on preventive and supportive, and still making plans of how to be corrective, but that should not be what our ultimate goal is. So I'm hoping that this kind of got you excited to explore this topic further, and I'll see you online again soon.